James, thank you for joining us here at the NASDAQ market site. You've had a fascinating career from Google to NASA and now as CEO and founder of Orbital Insight. Tell equities viewers a little bit about your journey and give some background on what Orbital Insight and why you got into data and satellite imagery.
Sure. So I spent several years at NASA and just loved space. And I've been really fascinated as commercial space has started to evolve and become a real thing. And I also had a really interesting opportunity to run the Google Books project through the 20 millionth book scanned, where we took a picture of every page of every book and then put it up on Google search so that people could actually type to be or not to be and get Hamlet. So what we're trying to do at Orbital Insight is bring the two together, because we know the number of satellites going up. There's expected to be 1,000 satellites looking at Earth by 2020 because of all the different commercial players that are starting to launch. And this is interestingly driven by the same technology that makes your cell phone possible, because the cell phone's already got a CPU, and a camera, and a radio, and it's very cheap. And so we're finally seeing the impact of Moore's Law on space and getting this tremendous growth of satellites. And so Orbital Insight is about using the kind of technology we use for Google Books, the kind of very large-scale image pipeline, in order to process all those images and take, as we say, the economic pulse of the world.
Tell us a little bit about the specific types of information that this satellite imagery can provide.
So a few examples. One of them is that we can look at parking lots and we can tell you how Walmart's doing, or how Target's doing, or how much Chipotle is being affected by the changes in some of the challenges that they've had. So we can do that just by counting cars, and we actually use deep learning to count the cars in all these images and then correlate up the results to predict quarterly sales. But we can also look at some very different things. We can look at predictions of corn yield, how much corn is being grown, how well the corn farmers are doing in Illinois. We can actually look at building density in places like Sri Lanka. And we've been working with the World Bank at whether we can use building density in the third world as a proxy for poverty in order to track where poverty is. So there's this tremendous, one of the things that's so fascinating about the company and about being part of the company is the tremendous breadth of the things that we can actually measure.
Who are your clients and what industry sectors are you finding are most intrigued by the satellite imagery?
So in general, it's folks who need to understand the world and who need to act on that understanding. So some of the obvious clients would be investors. Investors that really want to understand China and what's actually going on inside of China with accuracy. Investors in things, some of the things I mentioned before, like US retailers or corn. And then there's also customers that, like the World Bank. We work with the World Bank on poverty, and so they're actually a customer. And then we also work with US government agencies who have a clear need to understand the world and understand how it's changing.
So just from an overall macro standpoint, what type of impact do you believe this can actually have on global economy and some of the other industries you mentioned?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different kinds of impacts. So in terms of trying to understand the economy, trying to understand things like the flow of oil, the price of oil, we think we can actually be a stabilizing influence, because the price of oil in particular tends to go very high when oil gets short and then very low when oil gets plentiful. And part of the reason for that is there's a big time delay between the time that a lot of oil gets pumped and the times that everybody really realizes that all the oil tanks are getting full. So we can help stabilize that by providing real-time or near real-time visibility. And then on the more social issues, like poverty, the places in the third world that have the worst poverty problems also have the worst data. So being able to provide accurate, much more timely data on where poverty is and where it isn't, where deforestation is occurring and where it isn't, where the big trees are, where carbon is sequestered, and helping to enforce, ultimately, we believe this technology can help to enforce climate treaties. So there's a bunch of social impacts as well as the economic impacts.
So fascinating stuff. What's next in terms of the innovation of satellite imagery, and do you have any competitors in this space?
So in terms of what's next, there's a tremendous number of satellites going up in the next year. So we've got Planet Labs thinks they're going to have daily images of everywhere in the world in another year. Skybox, now Terabella, says they're going to launch 12 more. Our friends at Black Sky think they're going to launch 60. So we're watching this tremendous growth in the number of satellites and literally watching the rockets go up. So that's one thing that's really exciting. In terms of competitors, there are some earlier phase startups that are looking at this because it's such a fascinating area and the technology is so ready for it, but we feel like we're well ahead of anybody else who's working in this sort of very large scale satellite image and drone image processing space.
That's all very interesting stuff. And just lastly, one of your colleagues participated in Equity's Innovation Forum just last month, and there was so much interest on the discussion. Are you finding in general that just the rate of space investments is going to continue to increase at a rapid pace?
Yeah, we believe it will across the supply chain, all driven by the reductions in the cost of the launch and the cost of the space hardware. And that's causing tremendous investment in satellites to measure all kinds of things. And then in the analytics companies like ours that take that data and push it out to where it becomes an insight.
Well, James, we wish you continued success and the best of luck. And thanks again for joining Equities here at the NASDAQ market site.